Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed. I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. We are about to present to you the interview that we had on May 10th at 7:30 p.m. with Elyssa M. Bolt. She is a candidate for the New York 22nd Congressional District, running on the Democratic line against, presumably, the candidate Anthony Brindisi. Now, before we go to the video, we do need to mention that there was a technological issue. There was a problem where our audio track was lost. This is something that has never happened to us before, and we are surprised, shocked, and upset. This is an error on our part and our part alone. And we immediately contacted Elyssa Bolt that same night to make sure that she was aware that this issue had occurred. We spoke with her, and with her permission, we are going to present the entire track without edit so that you can see every word that I am saying and reading my lips, and I will try to reproduce as close to verbatim as possible what I was saying in the interview so that you can hear that. And we will try our very best to make sure that all context is exactly the same as what was done in the actual interview. We have apologized to Elyssa Bolt, and we again apologize to her and to you for this imperfection, this error of our company to not provide this properly for you, the soundtrack being missing. We again extend to Elyssa Bolt at any time the opportunity to come onto this program live or recorded, to have an additional interview, to extend or expand any of the comments and thoughts. And we apologize to, most of all, you for our failure, our technological issue in this matter. We take this very seriously, and it is important, and we wanted you to know where we made a mistake. But with that said, and with the approval of Elyssa M. Bolt, we will present you the interview as best as we can. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, folks. So we're going to be doing the audio track here and trying to restate what we had said before and keeping all context in place. So we introduce ourselves. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am Michael Voss, Dragon Southern Tier. And we are happy to be holding a tradition, a biannual tradition, of covering candidates and individuals of significance that are that we do interviews with. And one of the individuals that we're speaking about, in the past we've done Dr. Art Laffer and also Vice Presidential candidate Spike Jones. And we'd like to give these candidates and individuals an opportunity to speak freely. And so we're going to be introducing in a moment Elyssa Bolt, who is here with us. And this is our guest, Elyssa Bolt, who is with us. And she'll be speaking with us about why she's running and what she plans to do for the New York 22nd District. Now, Elyssa is also an individual who is in her 30s. She is a Democrat, progressive. She's going to be running against Anthony Brindisi, and she works in housing. And so we just want to make sure that we've covered the background. She's been on several news programs, and we're just making sure that we have correctly understood all the information about her. And I'm going to be starting off with a question in a moment. And we're going to be asking her who she is. And that she's lived in New York 22nd District for about a year.
That is absolutely correct, yes.
Okay. So we now just want to make sure that she has an opportunity to introduce herself to everyone who's going to be listening to this program.
Sure. So my name is Elyssa Bolt. I am a 33-year-old trans woman from Rome, New York, who holds a master's degree in ancient history from Penn State and has done everything from teaching high school humanities in Arizona to teaching English as a second language to young children in China. I am currently working in the field of public housing, helping to alleviate the serious homelessness crisis and housing shortage in the city of Utica. I serve clients who have fallen on hard times through no fault of their own, help them get back on their feet and into housing so they can regain a sense of control over their lives. I'm for office because I believe that the way to ultimately solve these problems that so many innocent Americans fall into is to go from the top down and systematically tackle the issues of poverty, housing, healthcare, and other problems that keep people from living full and rich lives.
And so at this point, I'm going to say that I really want to thank her for her work working with the homeless, because I am an advocate of the homeless. And I work with SUNY Broom on the Homeless Week, which has just passed in the last week. I've been doing it for about 3-4 years. And it's an important program, letting people be aware about homelessness. And so we do appreciate that. And I've been homeless twice. So I do appreciate that she's addressing that issue and working with that. And so we're going to start off with a very simple question. And it's, her middle name is Michaela. And I believe that is a Slavic name. And I'm asking her, is that correct?
That's right.
And because I'm familiar with Slavic names.
It's more Scandinavian. My father's family immigrated from the Netherlands in the 1950s following World War II. They lost everything to the war and served in the resistance and moved to North America afterward. My mother's family are German and Scandinavian Americans. I do have a distant connection to the Mayflower as well as some of the earliest ethnic English residents of Rome, but otherwise I'm German Scandinavian.
Okay. So I'm not too far off on that. Being in Russia,
Okay.
I was somewhat familiar with the names in that region, so it's pretty close. Not that far off. So now I'm going on to her website and some information that's there where she's talking about the fact that she's lived in 6 different states and 3 different countries. And so want to ask which countries and how long she has lived in them.
Sure. So my whole biography, I was born in Washington State, not the Seattle area, but a small town on the east side, east of the mountains, where my parents were high school teachers. And when I was very young, we moved to South Bend, Indiana. So my father began graduate studies at Notre Dame. We lived there throughout his graduate student career and afterward. So that's where I grew up. I call Indiana my home originally, but it's been quite a while since I've actually lived there. I moved just across the state line to attend college in West Michigan at Calvin University in Grand Rapids, then lived at Penn State for 2 years to get my degree, moved to Arizona and lived out there on and off for about 5 years. During college, I had the opportunity to do 2 different semesters abroad, and I lived in Budapest, Hungary, and Athens, Greece, picking up valuable perspectives on how democracy works in other countries. Lived in Arizona for the better part of 5 years before finding an opportunity to teach English as a second language in China. I was there for about 2.5 years. Had a nice, comfortable life, but decided eventually it was time to come back home and time to start helping people out in a community. By the time I decided this, my parents had moved to Corning in the Southern Tier. So I've been to Binghamton several times. My dad has some connections at Binghamton University, and I know the town decently. And after first crashing at my parents' home just to resettle and re-entry, I found a position in Utica and moved to nearby Rome so that I live in Rome, work in Utica. I've been here since last summer, going on a year, and I really love it here.
So at this point, I believe I'm going to ask a question
Okay.
about having her spending time out in Athens and in also Budapest. And so want to ask about how long she had been there.
1 semester each. Yeah, the Budapest was about 3.5 months. Athens was a full 4 months.
And so I want to double check, was she there as a student or was she living there for the full time?
Oh yeah, it was definitely much more immersive than a vacation. I did pick up some of the local languages. I actually found that a lot of Hungarians thought I was a Hungarian. I got asked directions in Hungarian by Hungarians around Budapest, so I feel like I really got the experience of living there.
And so this is something that we find is very interesting because many people, they go overseas, but they're there for like a week. They have a vacation, but they're not involved. They're not there actually as part of the community and not really there long enough to know about the governments and how they're run, even though sometimes they advocate for that. On May 4th, on her Facebook page, she has a Facebook page where she did a video to inform the public. Now, on that, she mentions on May 4th that she had she was upset about the Chinese government and the restrictions that it had provided. And so I'm asking her at this point to clarify the difference between a progressive, a Democrat, and a socialist. Actually, Democrat first, so that people can understand, because the names are used interchangeably very often. And so there needs to be some clarity on what she believes they are. What's a Democrat, a progressive, and socialist?
Okay, so a Democrat believes in some form of rule by the people through free and fair elections. There are many shades of democracy. Some are more direct democracy, like we had in colonial New England, some communities in Switzerland. Most are more representative, and the amount of power invested in those representatives varies from country to country. A progressive would be someone who operates within a basic democratic framework, who favors policies that create a social safety net and keep people out of poverty and other preventable emergencies, that puts the value of human life and dignity ahead of money and profits for the wealthy. And as for a socialist and progressive overlap. Socialism is, I think, more about really redoing the existing system to build society around that notion of a safety net. Progressivism means working within the existing systems to make them more user-friendly and less punishing to people who fall behind.
Okay. And so now I'm asking a question about, well, it's very important for people to know the difference, because Democrat and socialist, progressive, they're all used interchangeably. And I want to be very clear here that they're not the same thing, and many people find differences in them. And I want to be clear that even though I want to be clear that Ms. Bolt is a progressive, Is that correct?
Yes, would say that I'm a progressive. I believe that the progressive umbrella is wide enough that there are other people who identify as progressives who I would agree with on many things and disagree with on some. I would also self-identify as a left libertarian, meaning that I, to some extent, agree with the basic claims of libertarians that people should have freedoms to do what they want without government interference in their lives. But the leftist part of that means that the jobs that the government should be entrusted with would be primarily to look out for people and keep them from being exploited by the wealthy and powerful.
So now I'm going to try and clarify because there's a little bit of a difference.
Sure.
And it's a difference between the classic view of a progressive and socialism and capitalism. And so I want to make sure that I'm understanding that what she's speaking about is still allowing people to have a motivation that's more capitalistic than just a purely social or progressive ideology. And I point out that many people look at socialism and progressivism to have elements that are kind of like the Chinese government, where you have autonomous zones and you have other repressive issues that they support. And so I want her to clarify, does she agree with all of that, or is there something different about that? Are you for or against autonomous zones and some of the other socialist progressive ideas that we've seen being promoted in the media?
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to clarify that. So it's a popular perception, but a misconception that socialism and communism are the same thing. Communism seeks to provide a far more decentralized framework from what socialism does. Socialism still believes in the rights to private property. Communism does not. In practice, countries that have adopted communism have not even lived up to Karl Marx's vision. They have quickly had one faction seize power for themselves and simply turn it into another totalitarian regime that far more resembles those of the most terrible far-right regimes in history than it does of any socialist dream of a social safety net and prosperity for ordinary people. I look not to China or other communist countries for inspiration for how we should restructure society, but rather to countries like Sweden and Denmark, where you have human rights, you have individual freedoms, you have private property, you do have the better forms of capitalism, you have incentives for people to work hard, grow their business. What you don't have is people falling on incredibly hard times through no fault of their own and simply being kicked over and over so that they can never get back up.
Okay, at this point, I want to put in clarification because the Nordic nations like Sweden, Denmark, others have come out and they have declared that they are not socialist nations, but in fact, they're capitalistic. And that this was something that was debunked by the Nordic nations themselves when it was brought up by Bernie Sanders in a previous election. And so I just want to clarify that point. Yeah, I'm not picking on her on that, but I just want to clarify that that was something they have stated previously.
Yes.
So now I'm going to move on to another topic and talking about her website and the fact that she had created a website back in February. She had gone online and put in a page identifying that she wanted to run for Congress. And she had a website which was created in April to also highlight that she was running for the election. So I just want to make sure.
That is true, yes. Yes, I had decided, I had announced on my own personal social media pages and in front of small crowds at rallies in Rome and in Norwich that I was planning to run regardless of the outcome of this year's election.
When was that?
That was last fall. I announced to a live audience in October last fall.
Okay, so before the election was even done,
Yes.
You had already made that decision, whether it was Anthony Brindisi or Claudia Tenney. Let me ask why.
The idea had sort of been bouncing around for a long time. Really, it started, I think I said this on my radio interview in Utica last week. The seed was planted when I was 9 years old when I saw the U.S. Capitol in real life for the first time on a family vacation. We were inside the House of Representatives in the upper balcony. I looked down and saw our nation's government at work, and my 9-year-old heart went, I want to be out there someday. As for this specific district, I just felt like the time was right. We're at this really narrow window in history where young candidates who've never held elected office before are running for Congress, and some of them are actually winning. And I think right now is my generation's chance to just see how far we can get, to see how many seats in Congress that we can claim without going through the usual motions of a conventional political career. So it's a gamble I decided to take because I really have everything to gain and nothing to lose. And I think right now is a moment that the people will respond to because this momentum is building across the country. And it's time to show the country that it's not just the big city districts that can produce candidates like me, that the more rural districts, the more diverse districts between urban and rural with Republican voters can also support a candidate like this, and that the so-called revolution of younger candidates replacing the veteran politicians can happen here as much as it can happen on the streets of Brooklyn or the Bronx.
So at this point, we're going to highlight. So she's speaking about people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and some of the other Democratic socialists that have recently won elections. Is that correct? And I'm just verifying that these are the examples.
I'm speaking mostly about them, although on a very different side of the political aisle, we've also seen young candidates in the Republican Party. We've had Madison Cawthorn in North Carolina, who's only 25 years old, youngest age eligible to even run for office, and he's already cemented a fairly secure position. Right here in this state, it's a little different because she was in Washington working on political campaigns, but Elyssa Stefanik came into the 21st district in 2014, having never run for anything before, having just moved into the district fairly recently herself. And it's worked out really well for her. And as much as I disagree with decisions that she's made, I style my game after her because that formula has worked recently enough, it can work again.
Okay. And at this point, for full disclosure,
Okay.
I'm mentioning that I do know Elyssa Stefanik from about 2014, 2013, when I was running for Congress, and I had met her then, and I believe I've spoken to her since.
Sure.
And that if you were to follow her lead, she's a very strong example to follow. So at this point, I ask, what is it that motivates Ms. Bolt to take on Anthony Brindisi? What issue or what subjects did he not challenge or not address that makes her say that she wanted to run against him even back in October of 2020? You know, what did he not address? And why is she deciding to run because of that?
Sure. I mean, one huge thing that I would challenge Mr. Brindisi about is that he had a chance at one point recently to vote for raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, something that most people in my generation support, and he chose not to. He's made decisions in office that suggest that the needs of the working class and the young voters are not his top concern. And I think that putting up a candidate from a very low income bracket, someone who's really been in this system of working with the poor, who's been on the streets doing homeless street outreach, who's spent many hours at the Department of Social Services helping clients fill out forms so that they can get into shelters. That's more of the person we need than someone who has simply been surrounded by wealth and privilege their whole life, regardless of their political views.
So at this point, we're going to mention that, in full disclosure, that we do know Anthony Brindisi for about 9 years, known Claudia Tenney for about 9 years as well, and that we have extended an offer to Anthony Brindisi so that he could appear on this program, and he initially accepted and then later reneged on his promise to appear on this program and to speak to the public. And so we think that Ms. Bolt has done a lot more in showing up to take our questions than Mr. Brindisi, who has not. Now, at this point, I'm asking, one of the things that Anthony Brindisi has stood for and that she has, Ms. Bolt has had interest in, is a minimum wage and the living wage. And there is a difference between the two. A minimum wage of $15 and a living wage of $25. And Anthony Brindisi has been both for and against these things throughout his campaign and in time in office. So we want to be clear. Do you, Ms. Bolt, believe in a minimum wage or a living wage?
I stand for a living wage. I believe that minimum wage legislation is necessary and that minimum wage should be a living wage. I would plan to fight for 25 to compensate for the lengthy delay that we've had in having wages catch up to cost of living that has kept my generation in poverty.
Okay, at this point, we want to clarify that the CBO has come out and studied the issue of minimum wage and living wage 2 separate times, and that when they looked at the minimum wage at $15 an hour, it would mean that approximately 3.7 million people would lose work. And many people are wondering, is that worth it? That if we were to have it, say, at $25 a living wage, then extrapolating out, we would think that it could be between 5 to 7 million jobs that would be lost. And many constituents may say, is that worth it? And so we want to ask that of Ms. Bolt. And I just want to make sure that we've made that question clear. And here's the question.
I'd say that's a very brief hiccup and that it would correct itself. I do believe in the basic mechanisms of a free market, and I believe that business owners would find a way to make their business model work so that they can support a living wage. It worked in the past. We've had periods in history where wages have increased and there have been temporary hiccups, and the market has corrected itself. And I believe that would happen once again. We just need to have a social safety net in place right now, including universal base income to get people through so that they can survive long enough to get back on their feet, with the goal of getting everybody into a job that pays a living wage. Everybody who can work, with significant social support for those who truly cannot.
Okay. And thank you for answering that. I know it wasn't a gotcha. It was just going over the details on that.
Okay.
Now, I want to thank you for answering that, and I know it was something you weren't prepared for.
I'm glad you asked it.
Now, I go on to then ask about a quote that is on her website, on her personal website, and which is the ElyssaBolt.com. And in there, she states that she's living under poverty. And yet she's also stated that she's been working for the Housing Department of New York And there are no positions in New York that are pay less than poverty wages. Can she clarify why there's a discrepancy?
Sure. So, as a condition of my exact terms of service, I am.
And we don't want to disclose anything.
I do want to answer the question though fully. I'm not permitted to disclose the exact nature of my job description. I'm not legally a federal employee. I do work for an agency that is contracted with HUD. However, I'm technically actually a paid volunteer in a service organization whose name I am prohibited from saying in any event that promotes me as a political candidate. It pays a living stipend that is well below minimum wage, in fact.
Okay. So we understand that a 501c3 has legal restrictions, and we wouldn't want anyone to get in trouble. We understand that that's not possible to speak about, and why it would have a different pay rate, and that's fine. So we then go into a different question, and we're going to be going to a statement that was made by Ms. Bolt, and part of a quote that comes from an article in the Rome Sentinel, where she was stating that, quote, she is the representative that would be, quote, standing for marriage, gay married couples, guarding their marijuana plants with AR-15s. And so I wanted to make sure that to get a clarification on that quote, exactly what does that mean, and what does she see changing, not necessarily addressing the marijuana or the gay issue at this moment, the gay marriage issue, but to just clarify that position. What does she mean in that statement?
Yes.
And I
want to keep it that way.
And just want to make sure she can clarify.
Not at the time being. I do have concerns that 10, 15 years down the road that could once again come under question. And so, it's part of the broader fight for gay rights, which is at this point mostly about discrimination. Our community faces discrimination in a lot of states that still we aren't protected by law, and so getting everyone uniformly protected from discrimination in employment and housing is really the crux of the LGBT rights movement at this point.
Okay, so we just wanted to make sure that we understood that there was no new legislation that would affect gay marriage, and so we wanted to be sure about that. But we don't want to address, maybe in the future in a different interview, we'd be able to speak about the marijuana issue, but speaking more directly towards the gun control issue, we want to address that. And it's a very big issue with many Democrats, many progressives. And so she seems to stand, Ms. Bolt stands outside the norm of what many would expect for progressives and socialists, and even Democrats. And there's been decades, perhaps even 50 years, of gun control that has been offered as a solution to some of the gun violence and issues that we have. And just this weekend in New York City, there were several shootings, and the answer is again being offered as gun control, and that hasn't really worked. So do you oppose more gun control legislation?
Sure. So I want to affirm that I do support the Second Amendment. I believe that Americans have the right to responsibly keep and bear arms. And I also highlight that that amendment does begin with the words well regulated. So there is a constitutional framework for having some form of oversight. It's simply clear that the last few decades worth of bills of gun control have not solved the problem. We still have this epidemic of gun violence, and it's still getting worse. And that's a place where I would break with the majority of my party to argue that their solutions are not really the right ones. That I believe rather the efforts that we see here with the current red flag bill in the Senate, sponsored by Marco Rubio, who certainly has a strong reputation as a supporter of gun rights, is more the way to go about it. That there needs to be regulation to keep guns out of the hands of people who will misuse it. And you can do that without jeopardizing the right to use guns responsibly by the vast majority of American gun owners who have no intention of using them to kill people.
Okay. Do you own a firearm?
I personally do not. The reason for that being largely, I have a small apartment where there's not really a safe place to keep it. I've had some training on what it really takes to keep guns safe in your home. You really need to have a place to lock them up. I simply don't have that within my means right now. I could see a future situation if I had my own home where that might be an option. Right now, it's not something that fits in my life, but I support the right of those who have the resources to keep their guns safe to do so.
And so I just mentioned that, many people who put up the idea of gun control are actually people who've never been around a firearm, never used a firearm. And so that makes a difference. And obviously that's an important distinction, that she actually has been around firearms and actually used them.
Yeah, I did grow up in Indiana. I wasn't in, yeah.
I just want to clarify that, a lot of people who are afraid of guns.
I'm not an expert on guns, but, I have shot a gun. I have spent time at the homes of friends who own guns, and I've got some idea what I'm talking about.
Okay. And so now I wanted to go into the bill by Senator Marco Rubio, which is also being supported by the executive orders of Joe Biden. And we're talking about a red flag law. Now, I go into some detail to describe the red flag laws that many people, many gun owners, firearm owners in the New York 22nd District and around the nation have some issues with these laws. And one of the things about the law that I want to express is one of the consequences of the red flag law. And that is in reference to children, that as a consequence of a red flag action, children will be taken because of Child Protective Service laws in every state. That if a home is too dangerous for you to have your Second Amendment right, then that home is too dangerous for the child to remain in, and the state will take that child from you. And so I'm going to be asking Ms. Bolt about her position on that, on does she support that kind of gun control legislation with those stipulations in it? And this is all done without due process, without someone having a right to confront their accuser in a court of law, without any crime.
I agree with the conclusion that a home that is unsafe should not have children in it. I disagree with the method of execution. I believe that people should have a chance to defend themselves, and that they shouldn't be showing up taking kids away at that moment. It should be a process that requires oversight and input and witnesses and just cause before you go to the point of taking people's kids away.
Okay. And so I want to further go into the fact that with a red flag law, it is one of the core requirements of them that they are, that there is no due process and that there is no crime that is necessary. And we've gone and studied this for several years with many reports and documentation. And at this moment, this is something that is in every bill, in every state on the red flag laws, the lack of due process, and the ability to take children. And so we're going to ask her about that. Is she familiar with this law and this stipulation? And how do you address that concern for constituents asking you about these bills and saying that you could support this?
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, but
Yes, there is.
I'm going to say that red flag laws are still a work in process. There's been a relatively brief window of time to really test them out because of all the controversy that has surrounded them, because people have opposed them. It's unclear what the long-term effects of some of them are. I believe that Senator Rubio is right to promote a framework in which the suspicion of being dangerous to have guns around is grounds for removal of guns. I do not believe that there should be no chance to defend oneself, that due process should not be suspended. It is a very tricky situation that requires a lot of informed debate among people in office of various perspectives to really reach the ideal solution. And I certainly am open to learning more from people of various perspectives on how to hammer this all out.
Well, we're happy to offer more information, some reports that we've done on it, and I'm basically going over some of the research we've done. We'd be happy to provide it so that she could review it, Ms. Bolt can review it, whether or not anything happens with the election, just to have more information. And we do offer that to her. Especially because of the
I would like to see that, yes. I wasn't taking it as one either. I recognize there are specifics where, like any candidate who truly seeks to be a lifelong learner and craft the best, most appropriate position, that there's opportunities to grow and learn. And if we had more people in Congress with that attitude, I think we'd be getting a lot further along as a country.
Well, I agree with you on that. That is something that I would definitely agree with. Now, speaking of gun control, I want to also address a bill that I mentioned to you about H.R. 127. Are you familiar with that bill?
Yes. Yes, it's being sponsored right now by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee from Houston. And the basic idea is to set up a framework for gun registry, which I think is something we really needed to have even 200 years ago. We called for it in the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia, that gun ownership is responsibility. It's part of civic duty and responsibility to one's community. It's not just an individual hobby. It's something that you do to take part in your community's defense. And so there should be a regulation and database of where the guns are, who owns them, who's using them, and make sure that they are used by the people who will use them responsibly and not misuse them. It should be like any potentially deadly objects, such as cars, which we have registration requirements for, and I believe that that's an appropriate framework to use for guns. I do think that there are certain points in this bill that are still in need of some hammering out. I'm not sure that banning certain calibers of rounds is really necessary to include in this bill. And I also have some concerns that some people would be denied a chance to own firearms based on a past history of mental illness that they can have recovered from and are no longer dangerous. The basic idea is good. some of the specifics need to be worked out still, and that's, I believe, one of the reasons this bill hasn't actually got very far in the House.
Okay. So I want to be clear and clarify that you support a gun registry, a national gun registry.
Yeah, I think that's the well-regulated militia of the Second Amendment.
Okay. And many people do have some issues with that. Right. But speaking about H.R. 127, there are some parts of the bill that are questionable that many people find are disadvantaged to women, blacks, and minorities, and the poor. And that's because of some of the requirements of the bill in terms of finances, like its requirements to get a psychological exam, the different types of fees that are attached to it. And I'm going to ask, is this a concern? And is this something where Ms. Bolt feels about that? And I'm just confirming the groups that it affects negatively. And
yeah, well,
where do you stand in reference to that?
I think that could be a problem, and it's a problem that could be easily solved. There should be language added to this bill that puts the cost of those licensings and examinations on the federal budget rather than on the dime of the individual. I don't think people should have to pay for these steps. It should cost them nothing but their time.
Okay. And so with that kind of segues us somewhat, even though it's a big issue for a lot of gun owners, New York 22nd District, we're going to move over to a different category, and I'm going to be speaking about the economy. And in reference to the economy, there's something like $6 billion have been spent, which is creating inflation and also deflating the value of dollars, but also inflating the cost of goods. And so this is a problem, and many people would say, should we address the spending of the United States government, or is it something, or should we allow this to go forward as is? And so I want to ask, where does Ms. Bolt stand relative that this is the correct path to be going down in terms of the inflation, deflation, and the amount of economic spending? And does she believe this was appropriate?
I think it's best to wait this one out and see where this goes, because market cycles happen all the time, and often they do correct themselves without changing course too sharply and strongly. I think that the focus needs to be on protecting individual people from losing their homes and their ability to provide for themselves, and that the bigger market forces will work themselves out in a way that can be fair to everyone as long as we have protections in place. The needs of the big corporations that are losing money because of economic downturns are far less important than the needs of individual people to keep their homes and their livelihoods.
Okay, and we thank her for that. And so we want to switch categories again and talking about something that came up in October of 2020. I believe it was October 2nd, and was reported in the Rome Sentinel. And this was the arrest that Elyssa Bolt had.
Rome, yes.
And this occurred during a protest for BLM. And I misstate this in just a moment and call it a riot, and that is incorrect. And I'm corrected on that. And Ms. Bolt is about to correct me.
The Black Lives Matter movement. This was not a riot. This had nothing to do with rioting. There was no damage committed or planned.
And I agree that I misworded that. It is not a riot. It was a protest, and that it was mostly peaceful, as described by the Rome Sentinel, and that it was a mostly peaceful event.
Oh, we were enthusiastic. We were chanting slogans, but we were avoiding confrontational language. We just wanted to make our voices heard. That's all.
Okay. And again, that's the Rome Sentinel that made that statement that it was mostly peaceful. And I was quoting it, so I did want to clarify that. And so I then go on to say, now, I want to be clear that the charges for this have been dropped. I believe it was for obstructing justice and I believe disturbing the peace. But as I mentioned, it was dropped by the DA, as have been many cases over the last 6 months from 2020, the second half. And so I want to ask, many people would have a question about a candidate who is running for office and why should they vote for someone who was arrested in a protest?
Certainly. It shows that I'm sincere. It shows that where many people hide behind computers and words, I put my physical safety out there. And I should also like to clarify, as I did in the WUTQ interview, that the only action that got me arrested was trying to keep a young, short-statured protester safe from physical harm. I was not directly confronting an officer. I was not planning to do anything that would confront or attack an officer. I was simply in a moment where I had a chance to keep a young person from potential serious physical harm, and I grabbed him and bear hugged him, and the next thing I knew, I was being thrown to the ground. That was really all that I did, and my actions were not aggressive or confrontational. I was simply acting in defense of a young person who was vulnerable to physical harm. Broadly, we have many people in Congress who have been arrested at protests, and I mentioned in the other interview, my personal hero is the late Georgia Congressman John Lewis, who was arrested dozens of times his career as a civil rights activist. That the fact is, the police right now are making arrests that are uncalled for and unjust. And if you're not someone who is at least putting yourself in a position where that could happen to you, then I think you need to have some reason accounting for why you didn't say that Black Lives Matter and put your physical presence out there to back it up. And I think I'm willing to listen to reasons for that, but I believe it's something that every patriotic American who believes in the dignity of human life should be at least considering and doing when the chance arises.
So at this point, I want to ask for a clarification because of the way it was said, and I do ask for a clarification. Did she mean that people who do not support BLM are being unpatriotic? Because that's how it sounded to me from the way she had worded it. And I don't believe that's what she meant, but I do want to ask for the clarification and allow her to clarify for me, is that what she meant, that it would be unpatriotic? And so I do ask her that. I just want to clarify if that is that what she meant. Even though I don't think that was what she meant.
It's not exactly what I meant, but I believe this is one of the moments in history that really determines the conscience of our country. You know, I do believe that in the 1960s, people who believe in democracy and equality and the rights of all human beings should have been out there marching, or at least looking for opportunities to do so. I think that people who put their own safety and comfort ahead of standing up for the dignity of other human beings made mistakes, and that I think it's important to be on the right side of history. I believe that at least showing up in some capacity, if you have the means to do so, if doing so would not grotesquely endanger your health or your family, then yes, I believe that if there's no there's no compelling reason to be staying home from at least some of these protests, that people need to ask themselves, what is it that they really stand for, and why were they not considering supporting this?
So at this point, I mentioned as a point of notification that neither I nor this channel support BLM, and we've been very vocal about that, and to say the BLM organization and some of the far left, both in their tactics and in some of their goals. We do not support that, and we just wanted to make that was clear. And other people may have different opinions, but that was ours since it came up. And we believe in all lives matter. Which brings up a question, and I believe this was addressed to some degree on WUTQ, that there was a question about white guilt and the difference of a people, whether or not someone, and this is something that is being supported by Black Lives Matters and some members of BLM, that there's people based on their birth, what color of skin they were born with, sometimes even what location they're born in because of the lack of diversity in that area, that there is a white guilt and that people should apologize for being born whatever color of skin that they're born with. And I'm going to ask Ms. Bolt, where does she stand on that? Does she support that idea of white guilt? Or how does she believe that issue? And just wanted to get a clarification.
No, I do not. I think that that's counterproductive. It's unhelpful. It does no Black person any good for a white person to apologize for their whiteness or their having grown up in a mostly white area. What white people should be doing is investigating the ways in which their thoughts and actions have been complicit in racism, acting accordingly, and seeking out Black voices to listen to. But effective anti-racism is not about white people's feelings that includes white guilt. It's unproductive and unhelpful.
Okay. And we now thank Ms. Bolt for answering this question because it is an important issue. It's something that is intrinsic in what we hear a lot in the news media and from some of these groups about white guilt and whether or not people need to apologize. So we thank her for clarifying that, even though it is something that was mentioned on WTQ, but it wasn't clear enough. And so we thank her for that. Now we go on at this point, noting that we've been on for almost an hour. We had initially expected to speak for about half an hour.
I'm sure there are.
And there's more questions than we could possibly answer all at once. And we look forward to being able to speak with Ms. Bolt in the future to be able to answer some of the questions that we're not able to answer at this time. So one of the things we always like to do when we end an interview is we always like to ask, is there any question that we have not addressed, anything we have not covered?
I really want to thank you for inviting me to this channel. I appreciate you taking the time to get to know me and understand me. And even if we may not agree on everything, I believe we do have ultimately the same goal of making America a better place and upholding everyone's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's the note I want to leave it on, that there's room for a national conversation on how to do these things, as long as we're willing to have conversations on the fact that some things do need to change, then so be it. We can disagree on specifics of how and still be united in common cause as Americans who want this country to be the best that it can be.
And that's something that we want to emphasize, that, without conversation, you can't move forward. You can't compromise. You have to have conversations, and sometimes you'll disagree, but at least you should have that. And voters should be given that information to make the best choice they possibly can. I'm saying something to that effect at this moment. And I do thank Ms. Bolt for being on this program to take the questions and to provide the information to the public. And I believe I'm going to again restate.
I appreciate that you took the time to do that too.
Yeah. And I believe I'm going to restate in just a moment that, is there any other subject, any other issue, any topic that we weren't able to speak about, but she believes was very important to speak about now and to share with those who are watching the program, because we have to communicate. Communication's key and critical. And I'm effectively saying that in this last part here. So, and that should be coming up in just a moment. I think I ask her that in just a few seconds. What final information, any last topic?
Sure. The number one plank in my platform is healthcare reform. I believe, as with other issues, that the human right to life and dignity is the highest good and takes priority over thoughts of profit and cost. I believe that we need to restructure our nation's healthcare model in a way that guarantees every human being access to medical care that they need, so that no person dies from curable and preventable diseases in one of the wealthiest countries on earth, when we certainly have the ability to take care of everyone, and we need to act on that. We need to find that solution, whatever exactly it looks like. We can have that conversation. We should have that conversation. There should be different perspectives on it. But what we cannot have is people in their 20s dying because insulin costs more than rent.
And there's an executive order I'd say that I'm upset with in that regard, but that's a conversation for another day. But I do thank Ms. Bolt, in just a moment, for joining us, for being able to speak to the audience.
Next time.
And next time we're going to have more of a conversation and address some of the things we weren't able to get through today. And I thank her for taking the time to speak with us in the extended time that she was able to provide to us in this interview to cover so many subjects. And she is, of course, always welcome back onto the program to speak with us at any time, win or lose, and to share ideas and things that she's working on.
Thank you very much. It's much appreciated.
You're absolutely welcome. And so for everyone, I do thank them for having been with us today to join us. And every Sunday, we hope you join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. to express your free speech, because that is something that we stand for on this channel. And we look forward to seeing everyone every Sunday. And so we are thanking everyone for that and taking the time and to be able to have the conversations. And we thank Ms. Bolt for doing what Anthony Brindisi would not have done, and to speak before the people and to let them know more about her.
ElyssaBolt.com. Yeah. My email is Elyssa M. Bolt, but my website is just Elyssa Bolt, no middle initial.
Yeah, and I screwed up the address. But and I am mentioning...
That's all right. It gets confusing.
And at this point, I'm mentioning that there is a website. It is ElyssaBolt.com that people can go to. There will be links in the description so that people can go and be able to look at that for themselves, to learn more for themselves about Ms. Bolt and her campaign. And I think we thank everyone for taking the time to watch the interview today. And that was the full conversation that I had with Miss Elyssa Bolt, the candidate for New York 22nd District. Now, at this point, I want to say to everyone, once again, we apologize that the audio track for myself was lost. I hope that we were able to convey the context, if not at least in part, the words that we were saying during the interview. We again thank Ms. Elyssa Bolt for being patient with us, even though we had that technical error. And of course, if there is any aspect of this that we have gotten incorrect, we do ask Ms. Bolt to notify us so that we can correct it, correct the record, and make sure that it is properly understood by voters, but we believe we have captured the correct context. We thank you, the audience, for being patient with us with our technical issues and in watching this program to see what Ms. Bolt had to say and what were the topics that we were speaking about, if not the exact words. We thank you. We hope that you'll have a very good day, and we will strive to do better in the future. Thank you.